All right, it's time now to welcome two of my favorite people to talk about football with, two guys that have rightfully been on the show and will continue to be as long as they'll do it for me. Seth Galina and Diante Lee from Pro Football Focus. Gentlemen, really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. I want to talk with you guys about the Rams. We talked with Ali Connolly earlier on the show about the Bengals defense is the foremost Lou Anarumo stand in America, or I guess not in America, in England. It was a great conversation. I wanted to talk about the Rams and just the way that they've kind of evolved and changed over the last couple of years, because the Rams are back in the Super Bowl, after they got here in 2018. But this offense looks a lot different than it did back then. They've evolved in ways that have been really, really crucial to their success this season. And Seth, you wrote early in the year about just how different the offense looked with Matthew Stafford, what it allowed them to do. And we've had that conversation a little bit on this show, but I think it's important to revisit right now because it's important to remember that this wasn't always the Rams offense. This is still new when you consider the lifespan of what we call the McVay offense. So if you were trying to drill down into what the most important differences have been between this version of the Rams offense and the Rams offense that was very successful for a couple of years in the early McVay era, what would you hone in on?
You know what I'm going to say? Backside dig. That is what it is. That changes their whole offense. So what I'm talking about is a route, like I said, backside, so a route on the backside of a concept, an in-breaking route. It could be between 12 and 22 yards. And the idea is here, like, hey, if our quarterback doesn't like what he's seeing on what we call our front side combination, he can work his eyes all the way back to the backside and find a receiver late. And Matt Stafford's ability to do that, to find that receiver, and it's not easy. I mean, we're talking about a couple things. We're talking about the quarterback's ability to say, hey, something is not open on the front side, which I'll tell you what, I've coached quarterbacks for a long time. That's really hard. Quarterbacks want to throw to their first read, and they believe their first read is open more times than it is. So the quarterback's ability to say, hey, it's not open, and it's okay that it's not open, because I have the ability now to, while the pass rush gets closer and closer to me, to reset my feet to the backside and throw this in-breaking route at whatever depth that the specific team likes an arm. And throw it accurately, right, with people bodies around them. And that has changed their entire offense. And you see it with their formation use. You see more 3 receivers by 1 receiver rather than last year where it was more 2 receiver by 2 receiver. And you see it with what they've done since signing Odell Beckham as a free agent, whatever, in the middle of the season. His ability to run that specific route has changed their entire offense, and they were doing it with Robert Woods before the injury. But to me, that has changed offense, and it has allowed Sean McVay to say, okay, I don't have to call the perfect play right now.
Yeah,
I can go into shotgun first of all. I can call a drop back pass. I don't have to rely on a bootleg, a naked, a play action, something like that to get my quarterback an explosive play in the intermediate part of the field. I can say, I'm going to put Cooper Kupp, one of the best receivers in the league, part of this kind of front side concept, and let him be the key figure in this 2 or 3 man receiver configuration, and let my quarterback find him. And if it's not there, and they were, like I said, they were doing this with Robert Woods, but now I have one of the best backside one-on-one, receiver versus cornerback players in the league that we hadn't seen for a few years in Odell Beckham. And honestly, that has changed that's changed their entire offense.
Diante, this may seem like a simple question, but if you're thinking about this as someone who sees this through a defensive lens, what's harder about this now? Like, what is keeping you up at night about playing this Rams offense that you just weren't scared about before in a previous iteration?
To kind of piggyback off of what Seth was saying, I want to say it was the 3rd down in the conference title game. I don't remember which or what quarter it was, but they came out in the 3-by-1 set and they ran a smash concept. So a high-low, right, where you get one of the inside receivers on a corner route and the 2 guys underneath are running like hitches or 5-yard ends, and you have that backside dig from Odell. And the first thing I thought about when I saw from all 22 was like, this looks really familiar. And I started racking my brain, and then I remembered that this was a money play for Goff from between 2018 and 2020. The difference is it was an empty and everybody was stacked or bunched, or there was some kind of window dressing involved, or there's a motion, et cetera, et cetera. And really what you take away from that as a defensive coach is a couple of things. A, they're an empty. They want the ball out quickly, right? B, they're trying to space you out laterally, right? So they're trying to manufacture space. So if you're in man and they're bunched, you're probably going to get some kind of space off of like these rub routes, et cetera, et cetera. If you're in zone, then obviously you have a kind of guaranteed amount of manufactured space as well. So for them to take some of the things that they like to do out of empty, get back into like regular gun where you can keep the back end to protect. And now instead of doing something on the backside of the concept, like Seth was saying, where it's a slant, maybe a hitch, a drag, something like that, some kind of check down-esque route. Now you're asking your backside receiver to run something in that 12 to 16 yard depth. And what that's doing now is adding the vertical stress. Right. So now you're trading off maybe some of the efficiency and getting these layup completions to threaten me more down the field. So as a defensive coach, now you've got to start making these difficult decisions in how do you affect an offense that's confident enough to take those shots, right? Do you send pressure? Well, the issue with that this year is that Matthew Stafford has absolutely melted your face off every time you blitz him, right? And then if you're blitzing, that's also creating more guaranteed one-on-ones with your Cooper Kupps and your Odell Beckhams. That's also not a winning business model right now. So they've just been able to open up the field so much more in these key situations. You see it in the red zone. You see it in third down. You see it in the open field area, right, where you're going to see a lot of disguises and bringing guys from different depths. So you get these guys mugged up in these A-gaps where the linebackers are showing like they might be pressuring. When you have an offense that can stress you vertically like this, now as a defense, you want to know what you start doing? You start backing guys up. We're not going to crowd the line of scrimmage as much. We can't be as multiple in our pressure packages. We have to be very mindful of who's matched up where, right, in what scenario. So it just as almost in a different kind of way, just as getting in those bunches, those empty sets, et cetera, forces you to be a certain level of vanilla defensively, having an offense that can play spread and push you down the field still has a similar type of effect. But now you're getting even more in terms of results because you can push the ball further down the field and you're not asking all your receivers and your offensive play caller, to be honest with you, to do all the work for you on the front end. You can put more on your quarterback's plate. And when you're a defense and you're playing against a quarterback that can handle the whole menu, that puts a lot of stress on you as a defense to try to take away some of the things that they do well. And you see, obviously, how this results in a Super Bowl run for the Rams.
It's funny, Seth, when I think about what Matthew Stafford does well. Obviously, even talking to former coaches of his over the last week or so, the ability to get the ball out from awkward arm angles and just the creativity he has as a passer is definitely one of them. The other one is he can reset his eyes in a way that I think is underrated. Like his ability to kind of, all right, I'm looking right, I'm coming backside to the left. Sometimes by design, sometimes in order to manipulate a safety to get that ball off, but just how much arm strength he has to do that late. It kind of feels like this ability to hit those backside digs is not just a version of this offense that we want to see. It's a version of the offense that's been unlocked specifically by what he does well. Like there aren't many quarterbacks that would be able to add this element in the exact way that he's been able to do it. It's like the perfect way to use him as a skeleton key specifically.
Well, the first thing I'll say, just kind of as an aside, when we talk about Odell Beckham in these routes is, he was there in Cleveland running similar routes. Now, I do think the Rams run this specific route differently. It's a little shorter for the Rams, so it comes open, let's say, quicker than the Browns running it a little deeper. But he was running those routes. He wasn't getting targeted, even though, and this is the crazy thing, Baker Mayfield as a rookie was so good at finding that route. And then all of a sudden it just dried up and he couldn't find it anymore, in the last 3 seasons or last 2 seasons. And that's kind of
the
why
field is off limits.
Exactly.
It's a no-fly zone for the Browns.
So like it's crazy to me that you had this guy who you would think after Baker Mayfield's rookie year that the Odell Beckham would work perfectly, and we're seeing it work perfectly now with Matt Stafford. And like you talk about him being able to reset the eyes. I mean, that's the hardest thing. Playing quarterback, there's a lot of seeing colors and just kind of assuming things are gonna be there where you think they're gonna be as you move your eyes back. if you're starting on a front side concept, then you're okay because you have vision on 2-3 defenders in a certain color jersey, and as you're doing your drop back. But now when we start talking about getting to the backside route, now your eyes have to scan across the field, and you don't know where other bodies are going to be. You make assumptions based on where the front side bodies were because defenses have to work on a string. But at the same time, like it's hard. I don't throw a lot of backside digs in my flag football league because it's freaking hard. Like I throw the front side concept all the time, no matter whether it's open or open or not. And I think that, like you said, like that ability for him to like see it quickly and confirm it, and then do the other thing you talked about, which is get the ball out from weird arm angles as defenses are getting after him. And I think that
because you're inevitably going to play more traffic as you wait that long. As you wait that long into the play, you're inevitably going to have to be negotiating and navigating bodies as things crunch in around you. And he just has a very specific ability to mitigate that because the arm strength and the creativity. There's such a difference between having a really strong arm and being a creative thrower. And I just think that he does such a great job of splitting the difference between those two things. And you talk about so you look at the play action numbers. That to me is the biggest, just obvious difference between. There's a bunch of them, but if you look at the play action numbers, right? They used play action on 27.3% of Stafford's dropbacks this year. It was the 22nd highest rate in the NFL. 2022, 5th. 2019, 2nd. 2018, 1st. 35.8% of Goff's dropbacks in 2018 were play action, compared to 27% for Stafford this year. It's a huge chasm of a difference. The other thing is they're running out of the shotgun more because the shotgun is a baseline of their offense. Last year, they ran the ball out of the gun 45 times. All season, 45 times. This year, it's 104 times. So Diante is somebody who's thinking about this in silos, right? When you're game planning for an offense. Thinking, all right, well, when they're under center, they're running or using play action. When they're in the gun, they're throwing mostly short routes. They're throwing stick. They're throwing all this bullshit. Goff last year averaged 6.9 air yards per attempt out of the gun. This year, Stafford averaged 8.5. That's third in the NFL compared to 28th. Right. So when you're watching this, I have to assume as you're trying to game plan for this team, beyond the throws that are available, the things you have to worry about from every set, every down and distance, every formation are just so much more varied and deeper and layered with this version of who they are than they've been in years past.
And that's how you end up in situations, and I heard you and Nate talk about this right after the conference championship game. 2017, 2018, 2019, that third down near the red zone where they just throw that screen at the end of the play clock, right? Because they can't really get the call together. When that's Jared Goff, I guarantee you nobody's talking about it because that's the expectation, right? You're not sweating it. It's a tough third down. You're just going to dump it off, get the ball out of his hands, whatever. Didn't work, but at least it wasn't a catastrophe, right? But now you can be disappointed in that because you see the potential in what they can do out of the spread, right? Like that to me is the biggest thing and the biggest takeaway that I have, and I've been harping on this all year long. And, to kind of circle back to something that Seth has been talking about, right? Like the progression. You can see just things like your technical proficiency with your eyes, your feet, how you deliver the football as you work through progressions when you have a certain degree of arm talent, when you have a certain degree of comfort with pushing the ball further down the field. So when you start talking about like creating these silos within the offense, it's funny. Like, I don't think that Sean McVay could have ever conceived a time where play calling would be as quote unquote easy for him now as it is compared to what it was between 2017 and 2020, right? Like a lot of that is I have to make sure that all of this is packaged up perfectly so that way my poor quarterback doesn't get to the line of scrimmage and have a heart attack with all the information that he has to consume and filter through and make decisions off of. With Stafford, you can see it. I mean, these dagger concepts where you're getting one route underneath to serve as your check down, and everything else is happening in that 12 to 15 or deeper range. You are asking your quarterback to take in a lot of information late in the down, right? Whatever decision you're going to make isn't necessarily going to happen onto these passing concepts right at the snap of the ball. Maybe your one-on-one is there, but this concept is still built to be effective even if it's not. And that means that your quarterback has to be trusted with, okay, you can make your mic point properly. You can tell where the may be coming from. You know what matchups you like. right? You can tell, okay, this guy's playing with X amount of leverage. I can get to this look off of that, right? Versus press, I want to do this. When it's off, I want to do that. If I see single high, I'm going to work 1, 2, 3. Too high, it's 1, 2, 3 in a different way, right? So now you're just taking some off of your plate as an offensive play caller and putting it on your quarterback. And now on the flip side for me, if I'm prepping and I'm a defensive coach, to your point about running the ball out of the gun, well, what does that mean? That means that I have to have 30 to 40 calls, right? If they come out when they're out in 11 personnel on 2nd and 5, I actually really have to have my entire playbook open the same way an offensive coordinator does in that situation, because I can't guarantee what I'm going to see, right? And you can't just feel comfortable saying, hey, we'll play, some sort of soft cover 2, or we'll play some sort of soft cover 4, and we'll be okay. You can't do what the Bengals did to the Chiefs in the second half. Just say, hey, we're just going to get the maximum amount of depth in our zone drops that we possibly can, and we'll drop, Hubbard or Hendrickson off and just make him like a quasi spy / extra zone dropper. And we'll just let this quarterback sit on the ball, and it'll be a grenade in his hand. You can't really do this to this offense, because I still think in Sean McVay's mind, he's comfortable if you give him that look, just handing the ball off 10 to 15 times and punishing you for it.
No issue with it. And that's the biggest difference between those two teams.
Absolutely. And as you get closer to the line of scrimmage, that's where you see those Van Jefferson double moves. That's where you see the Odell Beckham one-on-one on these skinny posts. That's where you see these slot, choice routes with Cooper Kupp and these corner routes and things like that. And it's been such a joy to see the layering of this offense, right? Where you can say, hey, all of our elementary school stuff that we've been doing before, we can still keep that and get to that whenever we want. But now we can start adding. We can add, knowing that at any point, any one of these concepts can be good for us, and you don't ever have to be fearful of, can our quarterback actually do this? Will he actually see the receiver break open at 2.9 seconds instead of 2.2, right? Those are the types of things that you have to be mindful of defensively. And with that, you see just how efficient you can be when you have a quarterback that can operate at that kind of level.
Seth, what would you say is the most important thing you've learned about Sean McVay this season specifically?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really interesting, and it's piggybacking on what we both said, what the three of us have said really, is just he's okay with just calling these plays and letting it play out. He's not, because they'll still run, and it's not like they've taken away certain things. They're running all the same stuff to a certain degree. They're running their arches concept, which has been really good for them. They're running their
explain that really quickly, because that's something
that's
something you've talked about a lot. It is something they run a ton. So how would you describe arches on a very basic level?
Yeah, arches is just, you got two guys in the slot. Could be from bunch with three, but generally it's two guys in the slot. One of them is designed to kind of pick for the first guy to come underneath. I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what it is. You can run. You don't have to run it with a pick, but it's really just two slants. That's what I'll say. It's two slants.
I was gonna say, so you brought up stick, Robert, right? And I know you guys have talked about this with Nate on the show, and I've heard Nate describe it, right? You have your clear out route on the outside and two outbreaking routes. Just take that concept and flip it inside out, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're looking at arches. You get your clear out route, and then the route you actually want to hit is the one that's coming behind it.
So they kill teams with Woods and Kupp on the inside running this route. You didn't know who was going to pick, who was going to first slant, whatever, and it was so good. One of the things that I wanted to bring up was how Tyler Higbee is getting a lot of run as the primary receiver in some of these concepts. Yeah. Not just arches, but yes, arches and stick and stuff like that. That's been something that they've needed to find. Because that's not the role that you put Odell Beckham in. Odell Beckham is not the Robert Woods replacement.
Yes.
Right? So they've had to find ways to get Tyler Higbee involved as we are running this concept, and we think most likely it will get Tyler Higbee open. Another thing I want to say, and maybe I'm just doing this so I can sound smart on here, but it's kind of a galaxy brain thing. So one of the things I looked up was the amount of trips open formations. And when I say open, I mean there's no tight end attached to the line of scrimmage. The tight end could be in the game wherever, lined up wherever, but he's not attached where we think about a tight end. And they're about 4 more moves a game than they were with Goff in 2020. And and I said it before, the percentage of 3-by-1 has gone up just in general. And I think it's super important when we talk about how they're structuring their concepts. When you have a 2-man concept as a front side concept, really that's a one-man concept. Because there's generally in a concept a route that is we don't need you. Your job is to just run the defense off.
Yeah, clear out.
And like
You're
there's
just creating space.
The clear out route. I had a more lewd way of saying it, but the clear out route.
It's the get the F out of the way route.
Yeah, exactly. So when you have two receivers and one of them is a clear out route, well, that leaves you with one player to run the route that you're trying to get open. And obviously that was Cooper Kupp for so many years when they would go with two by two. So on the backside, and the reason they did that was so that they were so afraid of just having this isolated backside dig where they would run two receivers, one lower and one in the intermediate area, coming back into Goff's vision. And it gave Goff a little outlet. Because if you have a short route, he moves his eyes back, he could just dump it off really easily, rather than find this receiver like we're talking about Matt Stafford does in the 12 to 15 yard range. So now if you're allocating your resources in a different way and you're putting a third receiver to the front side, now you have one clear out receiver. Now you can run a real game between the two other receivers, and it allows you to find whoever you want a little easier than just saying, hey, if this one receiver, Cooper Kupp, is not open, you got to work the backside. Now it's like, oh, we have three receivers. That means one's a clear out route. One, we can work the game. And if not, we can still hit the backside route, even if it's just one receiver.
Diante, when you've watched Cooper Kupp this year, is there anything specifically that's been different about just the way they've used him, his presence and kind of prominence within the offense? Or do you just think that this historic season he's truly had is more a product of their overall offensive ability and ceiling more than any specific difference in the way they've deployed him?
I think I'm leaning more towards the latter, right? Like all the things that make Cooper Kupp special in 2022 has been there for his entire NFL career, basically. But because they have all of these other ingredients involved, now you can lean 20%, 15% more heavily into his greatest strengths, right? So now on every third down, he can run these option routes. He can run something that's going to be breaking into Stafford's vision because you have others can do other things. And that to me is, again, and this is the point of trying to build out a roster or going out and taking these shots to go get these star player guys. Is so that way your guy that you know can do basically anything within your offense can be asked to do the things that he's best at instead of trying to patch up all these holes, right? You have conversations with this about quarterbacks, right? What a quarterback does to erase some of the issues that you have within your offense or to allow you to get to things that you would like to do offensively. And the same thing is happening for Cooper Kupp. So just that idea that, hey, on any given third down, he can be in the slot, and if we get pressure, we know he's going to be open, right? And he's going to have space for yards after the catch. If you're not bringing pressure, you can do what they did to the 49ers and make him the outside receiver, but motion him into a bunch. And now he's running this like bench out route, right? Where he gets to step on the corner's toes in a one-on-one scenario and break out and be wide open. They do such a good job of scheming up these one-on-one opportunities that if you don't have double team schemed up that's not being broken off based on the formation or emotion or certain matchups or the personnel, you're going to have a really hard time containing this guy. These are the types of binds that it puts you in. And now that you've got a guy like Odell on the outside, it's like this, almost look at it like exponential effects, right? Or multiplications, right? These like combo multipliers. Just having a guy like Odell as an X who can win one-on-one. Well, shoot, if you're telling me that the backside safety's got to be worried about this guy, right? Or if it's single high and now your underneath droppers have to get extra depth and extra width to get underneath Odell, you're opening up other space to Seth's point about everybody having to work on a string. It's just that much more space that you get to work with Kupp. And now you're seeing all these great yards after catch opportunities. And that's just on top of all the value that he adds in general as a football player.
The funny thing about, we talk about all the bunch formations that the Rams use, and if you think about the Rams, you picture them in your mind. Those condensed bunch formations are really one of the things that sets them apart. It's what makes them unique. The way that the Rams play with this 80, and again, I think they led the league in 3 wide receiver sets this year again. The way that they play, they came to it accidentally. Because if you think about McVay's background, and especially Shanahan's background, it's not a 3 wide receiver offense. This isn't the way it would look in previous iterations. But the Rams got there in 2017, and that spring, I've talked about it with these guys multiple times. They had Sammy Watkins, Cooper Kupp, and Robert Woods. And they said, well, these are our 3 best receivers. So we should have them all on the field at the same time. So they kind of stumble into this 11 personnel based offense. And then through there, because they were using so much play action and because there was so much motion, the formations get condensed and they start to play this very specific brand of offensive football that really no one in the league was doing. And so you watch those ideas and then you think about how Zach Taylor comes from, on its face, a similar offensive place as Sean McVay does. He was on that staff in 2018 when they went to the Super Bowl. So he brings the bones of the same offense to Cincinnati. So Seth, when you watch this Bengals offense, where do you see some of that shared DNA? And then where do you think they diverge in some of the things that they do?
You know, I wrote an article early in the season being like, hey, they went, I don't know if they had gone like a 3-game losing streak or a 4-game losing streak, and I don't remember, but they hadn't played well on offense basically for a few games in a row, I think around September, October. And I wrote like, hey, Zach Taylor, how about you figure out this Sean McVay thing and put it in the playbook? And, you know, it's me and Diante talked about it on our podcast, the Too High podcast, last week, where we were kind of looking up Zach Taylor's coaching history. And Zach Taylor is married to Mike Sherman's daughter.
Yes.
And when that hit me and clicked for us, we're like, oh, Zach Taylor is not really running the Sean McVay offense. Did he coach there in 2017 and 2018? Yes. Does this Bengals offense look anything like the Sean McVay offense? I don't think so. Right. I mean, I'm certainly some concepts both teams run dagger, both teams run stick, like, you know. But those are the kind of the things
three
that
receivers.
We kind of expect.
They run it. I think they run 3 receiver sets. I think the second highest rate in the league, or top 3. So they're right there with just the 3 receivers being on the field at the same time. They run. Both of those teams were up near the top of the league in the amount of empty that they used this year. But it's funny because that's kind of an accident. Like the reasons they come to that place and using a lot of empty is for very different motivations. With the Bengals, it's a way to, I think, make their quarterback comfortable. They did a ton of it last year because he did a ton of it at LSU. With the Rams, it's like this very strange version of it where they can be super aggressive and just run empty in a way that different people do. So even the ways they overlap, it almost feels more like happenstance than anything purposeful. Diante, I don't know if you feel the same way when you watch them.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is actually going to kind of dovetail really well when we get to the other side of the ball too. So, like, it's just funny to see these small divergences, right? And that makes up what we consider to be the differences in scheme. So, like you were detailing, you know, when you kind of presented this topic, when I think about the Rams and their 3 wide receiver usage, Sean McVay's response was to say, hey, somebody's got to go do this shit job that our fullbacks did, right? With the Shanahan tree. So, hey, Robert Woods, you seem like a pretty willing blocker. You're going to go take the shit job for us. And you know, as an incentive, we'll throw you some jet sweeps every once in a while. But you've got to be the guy that we use to kick out ends. You've got to be the guy that we use to root these guys out on these duo runs, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you draw that comparison to the Bengals, I think that the divergence there is, and you can kind of credit Zach. I do think that he made an attempt to try to take some of that McVay, Shanahan-esque stuff early in his head coaching tenure in Cincinnati, and then maybe realized he just didn't have the bodies for it in terms of skill sets. Not that they couldn't be 11 personnel, which we obviously know them to be now. I think that what he did was he saw what they had versus what they don't have, you know, in comparison to the Shanahan tree. And that's where you see him leaning back into that, hey, Joe Philbin, Mike Sherman, old school West Coast style of offense, where it's like, okay, well then we're going to be more drop back. We'll just be more spread out. We'll get into the empty stuff like you were saying, where we can get to some maybe truer West Coast concepts, you know, at least as far as that variation of the West Coast offense. And I see that in this offense, and you get to see the ways that it kind of disjoints some of the other things. And I know you guys have spoken about it on your show with Nate and some other people who are tied in with the Bengals. But you see like these tendency differences where it's like 2/3 of their runs happen under center, and like 70% of the time the under center run is outside zone. Well, what does that tell you, right? That they don't really have a natural fit within this offense for something that they know is really effective and valuable in the NFL. The ability to get bigger bodies on the field and to test the edges of a defense, right? So they have to find a way to squeeze that in. It just doesn't fit within the ecosystem of the offense that they run best. So those are the kinds of things that I think have drawn a lot of interest from me talking about Zach Taylor offensively. And now for them, I think the one thing that's unlocked it, and this is obvious, but it's Jamar Chase. It's having that ball winning X receiver. Same way we were talking about with Odell Beckham, right? And what that adds to your offense. Now, when you're getting more vertical, it's easier on your quarterback. Hey, we want to be vertical anyways. Quarterback check. You got the one-on-one you like? Yes. Is he in press coverage? Yes. Well, there's nothing else to look at in this offense now. Go take your shot. Go take your shot. Even if we lose, we win because there's a certain value in just being able to test the defense that way. All right, we've tested them enough. Now they're playing off. Jamar Chase on the screen. Now we'll get you a glorified punt return for our best playmaker, basically. So like those little divergences for offenses that use similar personnel packages is really where you can see what we consider scheme, quote unquote, right? What makes one offense what it is versus the other.
Well, it's funny because you watch them, and the Rams obviously dabbled more in it this year with Stafford, just the idea of being more spread out. Like in our 11 personnel, we're going to be in just wider formations. If you look at the numbers based on the last 3 years, the early parts of the McVay era, they played in the most condensed formations in the league by far. This year, I think they're 5th. So obviously, they've been spread out a little bit more. The Bengals want to play that way. The Bengals want to be as spread out as possible. I mean, that's where they want to live, and that's the biggest divergence. Just, again, when you think about it in your mind, think about how spread out the Bengals offense is. Like, Jamar Chase is standing on the sideline. That is where they want him to be to create as much space out there for him as possible. The Rams aren't built like that. So even if there are the same types of personnel on the field, even if there are some shared lineage between these two things, this is where we see those paths kind of diverge. And it's always interesting when you talk about coaches from a specific tree and how these things change over time and why. This, to me, Seth, is just a really good example of how we think about that idea.
Another coaching tree point here is that Zach Taylor played for Nebraska in 05, 06, something like that, when Nebraska did their transition from their classic triple option that we all know and love to the West Coast offense under Bill Callahan.
Yep.
And who is Zach Taylor's offensive coordinator this year? Brian Callahan, Bill Callahan's son. So I think he's more in tune with that offense. And like you talk about the amount of receivers on the field, they want to play with 3 receivers on the field. They want to play with 3 receivers on the field. And one of the differences, like Diante was saying, Robert Woods, you're going to be our pseudo fullback, and Kupp will do some of that stuff too. The Bengals don't do that. Like, it is, like you said, Robert, like it is spread. Like, so there's no guy saying like, oh, we're going to use our receiver kind of doing fullback stuff and he's going to block and do all that stuff. Like, that's not Tyler Boyd, that's not T. Higgins, and that's not Jamar Chase. So it forces you to say, okay, when we want to run the football, here comes some more tight ends on the field because we don't have that hybrid versatility that the Rams kind of like you said, lucked into. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Like, if Robert Woods couldn't handle it 3 years ago, we could be talking about a completely different offense and maybe an offense that doesn't get to 2 Super Bowls. Like, I don't know. So yeah, that's been really good for them. The jet sweep thing, I just looked it up. Last year, in how many games did they play? 18 games, I believe. They had 311 plays with a jet motion on it, whether they gave them the ball or didn't. This year, in 20 games, I believe, only 209. So they're not in that offense anymore, right? They are spread. They're going to be more static.
They don't have to be. They don't have to play. They don't have to do the Mickey Mouse bullshit anymore. And I loved the Mickey Mouse bullshit. Like when this offense,
I like that offense.
I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And when you watched it rolling, I was at the game that they played against the Vikings on that Thursday night in 2018, when Goff threw 4 or 5 touchdowns, I want to say, and it was wild. I mean, watching them just burn that Vikings defense to the ground with this offense was like, this is it. Like, I've seen God. This is the future. And eventually, this is what happens. You run into walls. You were going to have to keep evolving and keep changing, even if the version of it when it was really clicking was, to me, one of the most beautiful versions of offensive football I've ever seen. When you don't have some aspect of your personnel that can expand it, like we were talking about before, defenses are going to figure out within that condensed space what they have to worry about. And that's what happened. They ran into a wall. And just putting a bow on this, I think this is kind of one of the overarching topics we've talked about all season, we'll talk about throughout the week. The fact that McVay looked at the landscape of everything and said, I need someone who can do more than this. I think it is such a telling thing for the other coaches around the league. You can tell yourself as much as you want, I can make it work with this guy. We can get where we want to go with this guy. Eventually, you're going to hit a wall. For McVay, it was 3 years. You know, that 2020 team was just a different sort of offense. In the back half of certain other seasons, I think it looked like that. But them coming to that realization and saying, we need more than this, it was huge because that's what you've seen from them. You've seen that expansion. You've seen that evolution, and it's brought them to a place offensively that they needed to be in order to win a championship like they might be about to do.
100%.
I think that, you know, when we think about that 2018 that did go to the Super Bowl, one of the things that was never going to be the same from the 2018 is the run game in terms of how efficient it was. And we're talking about the best or second best, most efficient run game of the last 10 years. Like that was never going to happen again. They could fluke their way into it, but just like the things we know about run games are that, you know, whether you have good players or not, like defenses can just sell out and stop them. And once they do that, then where's your run game now? So they were saying, hey, we need to stay, like you said, just stay one step ahead. And honestly, you saw it with the 49ers this last offseason. I don't know what the story is. Shanahan fell asleep right before they made the deal with Stafford or whatever for the Rams, and they couldn't get a deal done. And then they say, okay, well, we got to go out and find a quarterback somewhere, and they go and take Trey Lance in the draft. So yeah, like every team is gonna have to deal with that. And you kind of see also the other side, which is, hey, here's Matt LaFleur coming over from this offense, and he gets put in with Aaron Rodgers, and that offense is absolutely sickening for three straight years.
100%.
All right, gentlemen.
I mean, it's all about widening the margin of error, right?
That's exactly right. And that's exactly right. And that's what you've seen. At the very baseline level, that's what you've seen, is that they have widened the margin of error, and it's allowed their best players to shine in ways they couldn't even before. And it's a truly like season-defining type thing. That expansion, that evolution, the way that they've changed could be ultimately the story of the NFL this year because they could be winning a Super Bowl here in about 6 days. Gentlemen, sincerely appreciate the time. It is always so good to chat with you. Please tell the people where they can read and listen to you.
PFF.com and the Too High podcast.
The Too High. I was giving you a chance to pump up the Too High podcast. That's what I was trying to do.
Yeah, the Too High podcast. We record twice a week. I'm sure that there's probably a decent amount of overlap between our audiences, but if you haven't checked us out before, it's a lot of conversations like this, right? Trying to take a 10,000-foot view of what's happening right now, right? Expanding these narratives, trying to advance these conversations so everybody understands where the league is at, where it's been, and where it's going. And I think that's the best work that we do.
I totally agree. And listening to you guys talk about football is one of my favorite things to do. You make me smarter. You make me appreciate things in a way I didn't before. And if you guys are not listening to the Too High Show and what these guys do, you're missing out.